liquid metal monsters from a planet called Janssen.
This would be a kind of life entirely foreign to us and to our experiences.
A computer code in nature that may cause supernatural events.
The universe may be just smacking us in the face and saying, of course we're in a simulation. All this evidence points to it.
And the Soviet sun gun. Could we be roasted by rogue Russians?
If they're able to turn the sun into a weapon, then we'll probably all be toast.
These are NASA's unexplained files. At present, man is the master. Metal is his slave. But new discoveries on Earth and on a dangerously close planet nearby suggest that we could face a threat from monsters made of metal, naturally evolving machine-like entities, creatures who don't just tear up our assumptions about the very nature of life itself, but who could challenge and defeat us for control of our planet.
We often assume that aliens would be interested in us, but these might just be interested in our planet's hot core.
January 2018, Great Britain. A scientist builds a machine with almost godlike powers. It is designed to create life, but not as we know it.
This machine we built to explore the origin of life and to make artificial life forms.
By making inorganic cells, the machine brings together different chemical compounds.
We put them onto the surface of the planet, if you like, and let them interact with one another. Then we're looking for droplets that literally burst into life. Within a few seconds, they'll start doing really strange things as they explore more of their environment. So there you go, this one starts bursting around spontaneously.
The cells in the dishes act like they're living, but it's not life as we know it.
These are completely dead. We're just looking at how inorganic cells can take on lifelike properties and fool us into thinking it's alive. And then at some point, we're going to be able to not tell the difference, and then maybe it is alive.
Cronin's life-making machine is programmed to automatically alter and adapt its chemical recipes, carrying out a kind of unnatural selection, evolution of a new form of life in a lab at high speed.
But I basically think we now know how to make life in the lab. Within the next decade, we will have made some very odd-looking life forms.
The life forms Cronin is working on are like nothing found on Earth.
In my lab, we've been trying to make primitive life forms based on an iron oxide.
Could life exist based on metal instead of carbon?
If we manage to make life in the lab, that will allow us to change our entire set of parameters of how we would look for life in the universe.
Bizarre as it seems, Cronin's and other experiments are not only persuading scientists that inorganic life is possible, they are already speculating what that life might look like and where in the universe we might find it already existing. Their research has led them to look again at a nearby star.
55 Cancri is a sun-like star. It's just a little bit smaller and a little bit less massive than our sun.
It's a star that is only 40 light years away, which is basically the equivalent of being in our astronomical backyard.
Around this nearby sun, they discover an exoplanet of a type astronomers call a super-Earth.
There's this planet called Janssen. It's about twice the diameter of Earth and about 8 times as massive.
It's like Earth, but on steroids.
Janssen is half the size of the gas giant Neptune, but it is made out of solid rock. And like our own planet, this super-Earth may well harbor life.
Super-Earths are good candidates for finding life because they're going to have a lot of interesting elements on them. A lot of heat and gravity to drag these materials together so the processes that give rise to biology can start.
For life forms made from rock or metal to evolve, geological, chemical, and climatic conditions would have to be just right.
Astronomers have used Hubble Space Telescope to look at Janssen and look at its atmosphere.
It seems like Janssen does have an atmosphere, and it actually might be kind of thick, and it might be kind of Earth-like with a lot of nitrogen and some oxygen and maybe even some water.
A so-called super-Earth, but in important ways, very different.
Its gravity is twice that of Earth's. So if you're 200 pounds on Earth, you would weigh 400 pounds on Janssen. You wouldn't be able to play basketball or soccer. It just wouldn't work out because you try to bounce that ball and it just wouldn't go anywhere.
And there are other differences too, as Canada's MOST telescope revealed in 2011.
We were able to see that every 18 hours, the planet passed in front of the star. We never imagined that you could have a planet that goes around its star once a day.
A habitable super-Earth, but inhabited by what?
Planets that orbit the star very quickly are also very close to the star.
Like Earth, but in one important way, very different.
If you were standing on the surface of planet Janssen, the sun in the sky would appear 60 times bigger, and it would be 3,600 times brighter than our sun.
Janssen is very, very hot. It's something like 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is just far and beyond anything we can even imagine.
For humans, this super-Earth is a vision of fiery damnation.
You would see liquid metal precipitating like rain out of the atmosphere. You would be buffeted by incredibly high-speed winds coming from every direction. It would be like visiting Dante's version of hell. The conditions on Janssen mean instant death for anything that we would understand currently as life.
Life on Earth is centered on DNA, on proteins being arranged in different orders. And it's all kind of delicate. If you put too much heat into it, those chains of proteins fall apart, and life becomes next to impossible.
The intense heat is enough to turn solids into fluids. Hell for organic life, but an atmosphere and climate necessary for the evolution of inorganic beings.
This planet has oceans, but they're oceans of lava. On a planet like Janssen, you'll have molten lakes of metal, of rock. Would they act sort of analogous to an ocean on Earth that creatures could live in? If you move away from carbon and carbon-based molecules, you can ask, could you create life out of inorganic chemistry?
We know of the potential for inorganic life from laboratory tests, but such a different form of life would break all the rules of biology as we know them. How would such creatures look, or think, or behave, even on a chemical level?
That's one of the amazing things about the prospects for finding life on foreign worlds, is that the chemistry that's available we can't even imagine.
Liquid metal creatures sounds extreme, but we've actually started building the first initial blocks of them here on Earth. Imagine what a lab the size of a planet given billions of years could accomplish.
Sci-fi writers have already imagined such fluid metal monsters in the Terminator movies.
Because of the nature of the place that they live, it would be almost impossible for any component of them to be solid. It would be very difficult to imagine them having anything resembling a skeleton. So, if anything, they would be more like amorphous blobs, perhaps like the T-1000.
Liquid metal organisms living in the fiery lakes of Janssen, growing red hot and able to shapeshift into any form they want.
Do you take a more spherical shape to conserve energy, to have as little surface area compared to your internals as possible? Do you take a more elongated shape for predatory activities?
Such liquid metal beings would have evolved as we have evolved, to adapt and to survive the conditions around them.
The idea that they move around by manipulating magnetic fields within their own body would potentially mean they could do so with objects around them as well.
Is it impossible that after billions of years on this fiery super-Earth, evolution will have produced creatures as advanced or more advanced than on our own cold, wet Earth?
I think if they're good at working metal, They would be able to potentially make metal structures in ways that we're not as used to and not as skilled at. But they'd be used to working with things in their molten state and would have had to have developed the techniques for doing so. They would be taking advantage of the tremendous amount of energy pouring in from their star.
Having mastered the elements on their home world, would they then look, as we do, to venture into space? Scientists investigating the hellish exoplanet Janssen ask whether technologically advanced liquid metal creatures have evolved there. And if so, whether they might venture through space in our direction.
The beings on Janssen, if these metallic liquid T-1000s do exist down there, would look at Earth and see an absolute hellscape. They would all freeze to death.
But if the Jansenites can travel through the bone-chilling vacuum of space to get here, then they will have the technology to overcome anything the Earth can throw at them.
Their spaceships will obviously emulate the environment on their planets.
They would have to keep those temperatures and the pressures sufficient to keep themselves together and to keep themselves from solidifying.
What's more, there are places on the Earth where the liquid metal Jansenites might feel almost at home.
If they were looking at visiting Earth, volcanoes might be a reasonable place to go.
It is no doubt a coincidence that many reports of unexplained aerial phenomenon happen close to volcanoes, whose temperatures can reach to 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit.
There's string reporting.
Earth's molten outer core, 1,800 miles inside the planet, has temperatures of 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the same as Janssen's scorching hot surface. The liquid metal aliens could be swimming in the molten ocean beneath our feet right now, unbeknownst to us.
I would imagine if these aliens turned up, it would be entirely bizarre. Would we tell the difference between an inorganic life form visiting and a meteorite going through the Earth's atmosphere really hot? I don't know.
Just as we might not recognize them, they might not even see us as life forms. Just strange clumps of organic matter scattered over the thin crust of our planet.
I find it very difficult to believe that we could interact with them in any meaningful way.
If they decided to wipe their new world clean, we may not have any way of asking them to stop. Throughout recorded history, humans have reported ghosts, time slips, and premonitions. Even today, there are thousands of reports of people experiencing the inexplicable.
A couple returns home from their night out. Moments later, the man notices his partner sitting down.
The woman also sees her mysterious clone.
Was that a trick their mind played on them, or was she somehow in two places at once? This has to be one of the creepiest experiences of your life.
A woman walking down the street passes a suspicious-looking man. She turns a corner and is shocked to discover the same man walking down the street towards her again.
It's like he was teleported there.
And two men lose control of their tongues.
A guy remembers having a conversation with a friend in fluent French.
N'importe quoi. À bientôt, mon ami.
Then he realizes, wait a minute.
Neither of us speak French.
It's very difficult to explain how people can suddenly speak a foreign language.
Could there be a scientific explanation for such bizarre occurrences? Professor Jim Gates is a theoretical physicist.
I strongly believe that there is a very strange mystery at the core of our universe.
To understand it, physicists translate the physical universe into mathematics. And within these numbers, Gates and his colleagues believe they have discovered a hidden code.
We found these weird pieces of mathematics that no one had ever told us was part of this set of equations. This weirdness really bothered me. We found out these objects had computer code buried in them.
Weirdly, this code, existing in nature, is said to match almost perfectly the error-correcting codes of ones and zeros used to prevent computers and the internet from crashing.
Error correcting codes are very useful in terms of our technology, but we weren't studying technology. We were simply studying matter and energy. Why would there be error correcting codes?
Gates believes that sewn into the fabric of physical reality are codes which act to prevent that reality from somehow unraveling or collapsing.
That's the only scientific explanation I can come up with. Why would we exist in a universe where the laws of physics have error-correcting codes in them?
But some scientists believe Gates's discovery points to something that seems incredible. The work suggests that our universe is a vast cosmic computer program. And like any computer program, it suffers errors or glitches.
Things like deja vu, where things happen repeatedly.
It's entirely possible that our whole reality may be a construct, some sort of illusion.
Many people, including very prominent people like Elon Musk, have bought into this idea that the universe must be a simulation.
And this is where it gets even weirder.
Tech billionaires in Silicon Valley are investing money into looking into ways to break out of the simulation.
In effect, they're looking for another dimension, the origin of our created universe.
We really have no idea what this situation is like outside of the simulation.
This supports the theory of multiple universes, of which ours is just one.
Once you've created that infrastructure, why wouldn't you create multiple worlds?
But if we are created, the question is, who is this almighty God?
Who has developed this simulation, and for what purpose? What are they doing?
Some scientists believe they have evidence that our universe, our world, is a cosmic computer simulation. Science and religion, long thought to be adversaries, appear to meet.
Is God the big computer programmer?
In the beginning, says the Bible, was the Word. The Greek for word is logos, from which we get our word logic. Since earliest times, humans have sensed that there is a logic written into the universe by someone or something.
If I'm building a computer simulation, right? I wanted that computer simulation to be an image of myself, right?
God, it is said, created man in his image. Some NASA scientists are convinced the logic of our universe is somehow the work of a being or beings like ourselves from the future or even another dimension.
Do I believe it's highly probable? I do. I do believe it's probable. I'd bet on it.
But could humans ever create such a simulation? There's evidence that we have already taken our first steps along this path. At the University of Illinois, the Blue Waters supercomputer is already simulating parts of our universe with incredible accuracy.
What will happen in 300 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years from now, technologically speaking, is beyond anything that we can really comprehend.
If our future humans are to build a machine big enough for this job, they will have to be very advanced indeed.
A civilization that has gone out, colonized planets, turned some of them into giant supercomputers.
But physicist Michio Kaku believes that even planet-sized computers wouldn't be big enough to simulate our entire universe.
Something as simple as the weather with trillions upon trillions of molecules, no computer on Earth can simply model the weather. In fact, the smallest object that can simulate the weather is the weather itself. Reality, of course, is even more complicated than the weather. There's a limit to how much information you can cram inside a computer.
But a convincing simulation wouldn't have to recreate the entire universe, just the bits we are looking at any one time.
If you look at a major video game which explores an environment, which has a whole city or a locale, that locale is millions of times larger than the computers you use to play the game. But it's okay because we only see one frame at a time. We're only rendering one piece of it.
Until I open the door, the rest of the universe and the rest of what's going on, if it were in a simulation, wouldn't exist. There would be no need for the processing power to create that.
But why would these godlike humans build a simulation of the universe?
You generally don't run simulations about the past to inform yourself about the past.
Maybe in the future there's some type of human catastrophe, Earth catastrophe.
The theories just get wilder, that we are effectively lab rats in some vast time travel experiment.
If you could send information back in time to affect the present, you would definitely want to run simulations to model that before you impacted your own timeline.
If you have complete control over the program, you could just go in and edit it or change things.
If we exist for a purpose, what happens when that purpose is fulfilled?
How about when the simulation ends? What happens to all of us?
If the simulation is shut off, then our world pops out of existence.
August 2018. A craft in orbit above the Earth puts the U.S. authorities on high alert.
The satellite was behaving strangely.
It begins moving in ways that satellites don't.
Satellites typically move according to what we would describe as a ballistic orbit. They're falling around the Earth. But if you see a satellite that's doing maneuvers, it's not just falling, it's zipping about. Something's different about this satellite.
The suspicious craft is quickly linked to the Russians.
The State Department calls out the Russians on it, but they deny everything as usual.
The Russians claim that this is a harmless inspection satellite. But if we look at its behavior and what it's doing, it doesn't seem routine, so it's highly suspicious.
Some fear that this mysterious craft could be something far more dangerous than the Russians would have us believe.
The fact is, the Russians are absolutely doing something that we've never seen before. If it is a weapon, how dangerous is it?
This is not the first time that the Russians have been up.
February 4th, 1993. A beam of light over 2.5 miles wide flashes across Europe. It's moving fast, raking the Earth from France to Russia in just over 5 minutes.
All across Europe, people are reporting that there was this bright light zooming across the sky.
You can imagine people thinking, what is that? A satellite? A falling star?
It's turning night into day. Where is it coming from?
The path of the beam matches the path of the space station Mir, which raises the question, what are the Russians doing up there?
Agencies are on this right away. They want to know, is this a threat?
It was claimed the Russians were trying to do some sort of experiment. There was a large mirror in space.
A satellite with a mirror firing light down onto the Earth reminds analysts of sci-fi wonder weapons that the Nazis designed but never got off the drawing board.
Is it possible the Russians have taken a leaf out of Hitler's playbook?
During World War II, Hitler and his scientists developed plans for Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons. These terrible devices, including jet aircraft, long-range rockets, and atomic weapons, were designed to swing the war in Germany's favor. The most ambitious plan was for a space-based weapon.
Hitler wanted to take the power of the sun and create a space ray gun. He imagined that he could harness this power and burn his way to victory.
It was a simple idea. Launch a massive lens into space, right? Focus it down on enemy territory and burn up enemy targets.
Hitler recognized the sun as a power for evil, more potent than any nuclear weapon. And he could harness its destructive potential with a mile-wide mirror.
The amount of energy this thing could pinpoint onto the surface of the Earth wouldn't just set simple flammable objects on fire. It could obliterate entire cities. You could render human societies like ants under a magnifying glass.
Defeat in war prevented the Nazis from constructing their solar superweapon.
Thank God Hitler didn't launch a space mirror because, frankly, if he had been able to launch anything into space, it would have changed the narrative of world history.
But Hitler's advanced weapons scientists find jobs after the war in America and in communist Russia. America got rocket technology from the ruins of Nazi Germany. But could the Russians have acquired something else?
The question is, what are the Russians developing? Why are they deploying mirrors in space?
In 1993, a Russian satellite fires a beam of light from space, causing panic across Europe. Experts fear that this could be the test of a resurrected Nazi terror weapon. The Russians announce that the device has been launched from the Mir space station. It is called the Znamia 2 space mirror.
This space mirror was engineered beautifully. It's not a rigid mirror like we're accustomed to here on Earth. It goes up in a barrel and then it unfurls. It's a thin, flexible material that reflects sunlight, and when it's fully deployed, it's 65 feet across. To put the size of this mirror into context, consider the biggest space telescopes that we have right now. Their mirrors are only about 6 feet across.
The largest is on the Hubble Space Telescope, which measures just 7.8 feet across.
Now you've got a 65-foot mirror. What are you doing with that?
The Russian government claims its motives for launching a sci-fi space mirror are entirely innocent.
The purpose for this Znamia experiment is to create artificial lighting for cities or for areas on Earth which don't get enough light, and that could, of course, improve economy. Russia, of course, has these huge polar regions which are in darkness for a big part of the year.
But many observers are skeptical and believe this mirror could have military applications.
With the Russians, you're never exactly sure, and you wonder, is this also potentially testing for some sort of weapon?
Even if the mirror is designed for peaceful purposes, it could be made very deadly very quickly.
Just a tweak to the mirror's design, and it becomes a much more sinister device.
By changing the focus of the beam, you could go from good for humanity, helpful mirror to weaponized city obliterator.
The Russian space mirror program has attempted to build even bigger and more powerful devices.
In 1999, it tried to go one better by launching an 80-foot mirror in space.
But the second space mirror deployment goes catastrophically wrong.
Fortunately, it doesn't work. The mirror gets tangled in an antenna and the experiment fails.
The Russians canceled the rest of the program for cost-cutting purposes.
In the late 1980s, President Ronald Reagan brought about the collapse of the USSR through an aggressive arms race policy that ruined the Soviet economy. A cash-strapped, recently post-Soviet Russia couldn't afford to continue their space mirror program. But some observers wonder whether this strangely behaving satellite, spotted in August 2018, could indicate that a resurgent Russia under Putin has restarted the program.
Well, the Nazis didn't hide anything. Their intentions were very clear. Are the Russians' intentions clear? Are they hiding something?
Since the Znamia launch, the Russians have had another quarter century to advance their technology.
If we consider the size of the mirror that's within our grasp, I'd say 1,000 feet is definitely doable. Now imagine that you could focus that into a tiny beam at Earth's surface. Who knows what you could do?
If the Russians have perfected the Nazi design, the mirror could vaporize a single individual. And with another adjustment, such a mirror might direct a 2.5-mile wide beam of white-hot death at the United States, big enough to burn through towns and cities.
Conventional forces have no defense against what would essentially be a burning ray coming from space.
Then we'll probably all be toast.
New York, 1950. Russian academic Immanuel Velikovsky unveils an incredible theory: that the epic disasters described in the Bible were caused by objects from space.
He believed that these events were caused by wandering planets and solar systems in flux.
If Velikovsky was correct, religious texts like the Bible do, in fact, record physical history. The universe is a very different place than we believe.
In the book of Genesis, a great flood engulfs the earth after 40 days and 40 nights of rain. The only survivors are the passengers on Noah's Ark.
Velikovsky was able to pose a theory of the physical mechanism whereby a flood could have happened.
Velikovsky suggested that planetary disturbances on Saturn may have been the celestial event that triggered the deluge.
Water vapor, material from Saturn, flew across the solar system to planet Earth, and that's what caused all the rain.
In the book of Exodus, 10 plagues hammer Egypt, killing children, livestock, and making the River Nile run red with blood. These events Velikovsky blames on Venus.
What Velikovsky posited was that Jupiter, at a very early stage, burped out what would become the planet Venus.
But it was actually a comet, and when it came in close contact and proximity to Earth, the tail of the comet Venus, as the Earth passed through it, caused the biblical plagues that you see in the Old Testament.
Velikovsky published his ideas in a book titled Worlds in Collision. It was an instant bestseller.
The reading public in the 1950s ate it up, and that's what caused Velikovsky's own collision with mainstream science.
Linking the Bible with scientific astronomy did not go down well with space scientists.
You lost all this professional credibility.
But 60 years after the publication of Worlds in Collision, some astronomers are looking again at its basic arguments.
Could it be that Velikovsky is right and that extraterrestrial events have impacted life on Earth?
Controversial Russian academic Immanuel Velikovsky believed that events in the heavens caused the great biblical catastrophes. At the time, his ideas were dismissed as fanciful nonsense by NASA. But a few scientists are revisiting Velikovsky's theories. It is now accepted that apocalyptic events on Earth, including mass extinctions, have been caused by astronomical events.
Velikovsky may have been wrong on the specifics, but he may have been right about a comet catastrophe affecting Earth.
People did indeed believe in ancient societies that the advent of a comet was an omen. Maybe there was a grain of truth to what those people were thinking.
In 2007, a group of 6 scientists from America, Australia, and Russia suggest a possible link between the flood story in the Bible and the crashing into the Earth of a large comet which hit the Indian Ocean 5,000 years ago.
The impact of this comet would have had devastating consequences. I mean, it could have created 600-foot waves. I mean, these are mega tsunamis that would have wiped out civilizations along shorelines and devastated entire communities.
The group claims to find evidence of a giant wave that swept miles over the land. Some even suggest that this comet impact might explain the 40 days and 40 nights of rain described in the Bible.
That impact would have thrown up a vast amount of moisture, of debris into the atmosphere.
Velikovsky also thought that the planet Venus caused the Great Plagues of Egypt. Now some scientists believe that killer plagues may well originate in space.
Although Velikovsky was wrong in asserting that pandemics came from Venus, he was certainly right in saying that pandemics came from space. They came from comets.
Space is populated, some scientists now believe, with extraterrestrial life forms, which, if they reach Earth, can enter and infect humans.
If that's the case, what we're dealing with is extraterrestrial virus, and that is extremely frightening.
Alien life forms carried by comets may be the cause of some of the most tragic events in human history.
The idea that comets bring death is very clearly written in the record of pandemics, of diseases, of epidemiology, like the Great Plague of Athens, like the Plague of Justinian in the early Christian era.
Our ancient ancestors saw the appearance of a comet as a worrying sign of some impending disaster. Some astronomers are finally accepting that there may be reasoning behind this apparent superstition.
The importance of Velikovsky is that he alerted the world to the fact that the Earth is vulnerable to the tails of comets.
Angry gods or alien disease hitching a ride on comets. One thing's certain, there's more cosmic trouble heading our way.
It's gonna happen, and when it does, we better watch out.
July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 touches down on the moon.
The Eagle has landed.
Bringing with it the very first humans to step foot on another world.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
On that very first mission, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin encounter something that remains to this day unexplained.
There was a kind of a bright cloud existing for many minutes.
Aldrin described this strange glow on the moon's surface as brighter than anything he could see in either direction. Scientists are baffled.
What are these things? I don't know. Maybe we're not right about the moon being completely dead.
Despite being our closest celestial neighbor, there is much about the moon that is shrouded in mystery. In total, humans have only spent 80 hours on the moon. We have made a superficial inspection only of a tiny fraction of the surface, and the dark side remains a mystery. But almost 40 years after Armstrong's mission, a lunar probe launched by India, the Chandrayaan-1, lands on the surface of the moon. On board is NASA's moon mineralogy mapper, and it makes an astonishing discovery.
In 2018, NASA announced definitive proof from their mineralogy mapper of water on the moon.
I mean, we've been looking for water for years, decades, till finally we looked in the right place in the right way and found it.
Water is the elixir of the cosmos. Where there is water, there is very possibly life.
Ever since the end of the Apollo program in 1972, we've been wondering, should we go back to the moon? Is it worth returning?
This discovery is a real...
But it's not just the possibility of life on the moon. In space, water is fuel.
Today, we have a modern-day gold rush. Not for gold, but for water. Because in space, water is.
Experts now fear a deadly stampede to conquer the moon. In August 2018, a NASA probe discovers the seemingly impossible: water on the surface of the moon. And this can't be water that has arrived from icy comet impacts.
Any water that may have been delivered to the moon, it should have evaporated right into space.
There's no atmosphere there to help trap it, and so it basically escapes.
And yet the NASA probe has mapped out billions of gallons of water on the lunar surface.
Polar regions, there are locations where sunlight never reaches, especially because there are deep craters there. And within those craters are places called permanently shadowed regions. In those locations, ice can remain there for billions of years.
Scientists now have an astonishing theory as to where this ice has come from.
A plausible way for there to be water at the permanently shadowed regions is that it actually escaped out of the moon.
This could finally explain the mysterious mist encountered by the Apollo astronauts.
If it's gas coming out of the interior, one of the most likely components could be water. So you have water escaping out of the interior of the moon today. And that's really exciting.
It's possible that vast quantities of water may now exist deep within the moon, a remnant of the time when it was a hot and geologically active world. And this water escapes to the surface as gas.
To find any sort of water on the surface of any world besides Earth is a huge, huge discovery. Discovering water on the moon is like discovering gold, except it's much, much more valuable than that.
Besides the possibility of lunar life, scientists believe they can use the moon's water to propel humans much further, much faster into space. Propulsion engineer Tim Pickens explains the principle of using hydrogen and oxygen in water to create an explosion that can fire a spacecraft engine.
These are solar panels, very standard. You take normal water, take an electrolyzer, this device, this is basically nothing but stainless steel plates. You can use electricity and actually separate hydrogen and oxygen in the exit here.
After separating the water's hydrogen and oxygen, bubbles are collected in a balloon at the top.
This doesn't look like a lot of gas, but It is a lot of power.
The balloon is carefully placed on the ground.
All right, stand back and get ready. We're gonna light this candle. Whoa! Man, that's powerful.
The explosion here is small, but scaled up and conducted in space, water fuel is expected to revolutionize space travel.
There's a trick to this. All right, so we've got our oxygen, and I've got my hydrogen. Got my rocket thruster right here. This combusts these gases. You ready?
All right, hydrogen, oxygen with exciter in 3, 2, 1.
Wow. That is real rocket thrust. This thing is amazing. It runs on hydrogen and oxygen that we can make from ice on the moon. This motor could go on a rocket today.
And there's a huge advantage to having this fuel source on the moon rather than the Earth.
To get off the Earth, a rocket has to have something like 80 or 90% of its takeoff weight is propellant.
On the moon, you have 1/6 of the gravity. That means it takes about 1/6 of the energy than it would to leave the moon's gravity to go somewhere else.
It's almost like the moon becomes a gas station that we can stop off at, fill up our fuel tanks, and continue on to another planet.
Water is too heavy to carry up from Earth. But if the moon can act as a lunar gas station, the whole nature of space exploration changes. The problem is, who owns this huge reserve of galactic fuel?
Who does this water belong to? And who gets to use it first?
And now there is a race to get back to the moon. And the race is not just between the US and the Russians. Now it's China, India, SpaceX, whatever.
Business-wise, the moon is starting to look like a good investment.
This is a prize worth fighting for. The cold rush is on.
The moon could become the gateway to the other worlds in our solar system. But some fear it may spark the first great space war.
There's a lot of concern over who's going to be leading the charge when it comes to further space exploration. It's still very territorial. There's going to be competition in space, just as there's competition here on Earth.
The grand prize to the winner is much greater than just the moon itself. Whoever controls the moon will control the solar system.
If it's Russia, if it's China, they'll have their own agenda. But if it's the United States, it could very well be our launching pad for Mars.